بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today I would like to share a reflection on a question that history has asked again and again. Why do civilizations, after reaching great heights of power and achievement, sometimes begin to move toward instability and decline? History shows us something both fascinating and deeply humbling. Civilizations rarely collapse without warning. Before major crises appear, certain patterns begin to emerge. And when we look carefully at the tensions unfolding in our world today, many thoughtful observers cannot help but notice signs that resemble those earlier warnings. This reflection is about remembering the lessons that history has already written, because the past often whispers its warnings long before the future arrives. Such warnings include: 1. The first warning sign often appears when power begins to produce arrogance. Throughout history, when societies become strong in military, economics, or technology, there is often a temptation to believe that this strength will last forever. Leaders may begin to feel they are beyond restraint, beyond criticism, and even beyond the lessons of history itself. The ancient Greeks recognized this danger long time ago. They called it hubris, meaning the arrogance of power. Hubris has preceded many historical disasters. When arrogance replaces humility, caution begins to disappear. And when caution disappears, societies begin making decisions whose consequences they cannot control. The second warning sign is the erosion of justice. Civilizations do not endure simply because they are powerful. They endure because people believe the system around them is fundamentally fair. Justice creates legitimacy. It builds a trust between institutions and societies. But when justice becomes selective, when rulers appear to apply it differently to the powerful and to the powerless, confidence begins to weaken. Centuries ago, the great historian Ibn Khaldun observed a profound truth. He wrote that justice is often the signal that the civilization has begun its decline. And the Quran reminds all humanity. Indeed, God commands justice and excellence. Justice is not only a moral ideal, it is the foundation of stable societies. A third warning sign appears when the moral limits of war begin to fade. Throughout history, many civilizations developed ethical rules governing warfare. Different cultures expressed these principles in different ways, but the idea was similar. Even in war, there must be restraint. Civilians must be protected. Human dignity must be abandoned. Human dignity must not be abandoned. Yet, during periods of fear and rivalry, those boundaries are often eroding. Infrastructure becomes a target. Entire populations suffer the consequences of political decisions. And gradually, the line between military necessity and collective punishment becomes blurred. Killing children becomes collateral damage. The Quran offers a simple but powerful reminder. It says, "Fight those who fight you, but do not transgress." War must never destroy the ethical boundaries that protect humanity itself. A fourth pattern arises also. When conflicts lose their original purpose. Wars usually begin with defined goals: defense, security, and protection. But as conflicts expand, those goals sometimes begin to shift. Defense becomes prestige. Security becomes revenge. The Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu warned more than 2,000 years ago that prolonged wars weaken both the victor and the defeated. History confirms this observation again and again. Wars expected to last weeks stretch into years, sometimes decades. And once that happens, ending the conflict becomes harder than continuing with it. A fifth warning sign also appears when sacred language becomes entangled with political conflict. Religion has long served as a source of moral guidance and compassion. But in moments of intense rivalry, sacred language can sometimes be used to mobilize anger and hatred. When conflicts are framed as sacred battles, compromise becomes far more difficult, and political disagreements transform into existential struggles. Yet, the deeper message of religious traditions often points in another direction. The Quran reminds humanity, O mankind, we created you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another. The purpose of diversity was meant to be understanding, not endless conflict. Well, perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that these patterns exist. The greatest tragedy is that societies repeatedly forget them. Each generation believes its circumstances are unique. Each powerful nation believes it has learned enough from history to avoid the mistakes of the past. Yet, again and again, similar dynamics appear. Arrogance replacing humility, justice becoming selective, war expanding beyond its limits, and sacred values entangled with political rivalry. This reflection is not meant to provoke despair. History also shows moments when societies paused, reflected, and chose a wiser path. Peace has often emerged when leaders rediscovered the importance of justice, restraint, and wisdom. The responsibility for remembering history does not belong only to governments. It belongs to scholars, educators, community leaders, and citizens who are willing to speak when dangerous patterns begin to appear. We ask God to help the powerless, to help the oppressed, and show us signs that justice has to prevail eventually. Thank you for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.